The Landon and Merrick families shared a bloodline that stretched back almost a century, but time had never healed the quiet resentments that brewed between their branches of the family tree. On the outskirts of Phoenix sat a sprawling 20-acre property known as Redwood Estate, passed down through 3 generations. Originally owned by Elijah Landon, the estate was meant to go to his last surviving heir, his grandson Chase Merrick, a man built from hard work, loyalty, and the belief that family could still be trusted, even when they didn't deserve it. Chase grew up on that land, learning every corner and creek, memorizing the way the sun cut across the fields every morning. To him, Redwood wasn't just land. It was legacy. It was memory. It was his father's dying promise that the land would one day be his. But the extended Landon relatives saw something else entirely. Redwood Estate was valuable, too valuable to be left in the hands of the Merrick branch. A side of the family they considered unworthy, too distant, too separate. Real estate developers had started circling, flashing numbers that made greed bloom in the hearts of people who had done nothing to earn the land except share a last name. The trouble started quietly. Phone calls between family that once carried warmth dissolved into sharp tones, accusations, and threats. At every family gathering, someone mentioned the estate, what they thought should happen to it, what they believed they deserved from it. Chase tried to ignore them. After all, he had the original documents from Elijah, an old but airtight will that left Redwood entirely to him. But greed has a way of transforming the desperate into the dangerous. While Chase was focused on expanding his small agricultural business, the Landon relatives were plotting. They hired a slick attorney named Paul Girardi, a man with a too-white smile, gold cufflinks, and a reputation for solving things, even when those solutions walked a legal tightrope over the depths of corruption. Girardi inspected the documents, studied the estate's history, and told the Landon side exactly what they wanted to hear. "We can take this." The Landon relatives nodded like sinners hearing the promise of salvation. Over the next year, Girardi and the extended Landon family began forging new documents, new wills, new property transfers, fabricated signatures, even false letters claiming Elijah Landon had changed his mind shortly before his death. They bribed clerks, falsified timestamps, and paid off anyone willing to look the other way for a few $1,000s. Chase discovered the betrayal when a thick envelope arrived, an official summons from the state court informing him that his extended relatives were claiming rightful ownership over Redwood Estate. He read the papers once, twice, 3 times, heart pounding harder each time. The signature on the forged will looked painfully similar to Elijah. Down to the slant in the Y, it wasn't just fraud, it was personal. He hired his own lawyer, a woman named Sarah Melton, who believed in justice the way some people believe in religion. She went into the courtroom with confidence, evidence, and righteousness. But what neither of them realized was that Judge Harold Compton, an older man with a stern jaw and silver hair, had already been compromised. Money had exchanged hands long before the trial ever started. Girardi and the Landon branch had made sure of it. The hearings dragged on for months. Evidence that favored Chase mysteriously disappeared from court files. Witnesses changed their testimony under the table. At one point, Sarah discovered that an entire affidavit she had submitted was never filed, despite her having a stamped receipt. "This judge," she whispered one evening after a long day in court, "isn't just biased, he's bought." Chase felt his stomach drop. "Can we prove it?" "No," she admitted with defeat, "not without putting you in more danger." The day the ruling came down felt like a funeral. Judge Compton stated with cold formality that the forged documents were more credible than the originals and awarded the estate to the extended Landon family. Chase watched the gavel slam down like the hammer on a coffin lid. His legacy was gone, stolen by corruption dressed in legal robes. He appealed, of course, tried everything, but the decision held. Redwood Estate was no longer his. The day he was forced to move out, he stood in the empty fields, the ones he used to run through as a boy, and promised himself one thing. "I'll take it back," he said aloud, voice trembling with fury. "And when I do, everyone who stole it will pay." His promise became his obsession. Years passed. Redwood was turned into a massive income-generating operation: luxury rentals, farmland leases, event spaces. The Landon branch, Judge Compton, and attorney Girardi all enjoyed a steady flow of money from the land that wasn't theirs. They prospered, flaunted their wealth, and pretended they were respectable. But corruption rarely breeds loyalty. Greed eventually turned them against each other. It began with the income. Someone felt they weren't getting their fair share. Someone else accused Girardi of taking too much. Girardi accused the judge of extorting more than they had agreed on. The Landon relatives started fighting like wild animals, each one trying to claw a bigger piece of the stolen cake. Text messages leaked, emails surfaced, threats were exchanged. One night, two of the relatives got into a physical fight at the estate's office. Police showed up, and the media caught wind of the tension. The cracks were forming, and Chase watched everything silently, waiting like a wolf in the shadows. He knew his moment was coming. Corruption collapses the same way a building does: slow cracks first, then everything falls at once. For Chase, watching the Landon family unravel from the sidelines was like witnessing karma write poetry. Every shout, every accusation, every televised argument was another brick falling from the structure they had built on lies. But Chase wasn't relying on karma. He had been preparing. While the corrupt alliance crumbled, Chase had spent years gathering evidence, patiently, quietly, and with the same precision his grandfather once used to maintain Redwood's land. He found old signed letters from Elijah stored in a safety deposit box no one knew about. He found voice recordings Elijah had made for legal purposes before his death. He tracked down people who had been pressured into silence during the first trial, some of whom were now ready to talk. He even found a former courthouse clerk, racked with guilt, who admitted she had been paid off to tamper with Chase's original filings. Her testimony was shaky, her voice filled with shame, but it was real. And real was something the Landon branch couldn't fight anymore. Meanwhile, the once secret alliance between Judge Compton, attorney Girardi, and the Landons officially detonated. Accusations flooded police stations. Lawsuits flew in every direction. The judge claimed the family had promised him a larger cut. Girardi claimed he had been forced into the scheme. The Landons claimed both the lawyer and the judge had tricked them. Their perfect forgery empire became a civil war. The media pounced on the scandal. Headlines read: Property War, EXPOSES Court Corruption. Family Feud, REVALS Systemic Bribery. The Redwood Estate Scandal, DEPNS. America watched as the truth began surfacing piece by piece. When Chase finally filed his new lawsuit, the timing was brutal, exactly as he'd planned. The corrupt alliance was too fractured to defend itself. Girardi's law license had been suspended. Judge Compton was under investigation. The Landon relatives were too busy suing each other to focus on anything else. Chase entered the courtroom this time with a presence he didn't have years ago. He was steadier, colder, wiser. His new attorney, a federal litigation expert named Mark Duval, laid out the evidence like a storyteller, revealing a long-hidden plot twist. He brought forward documents the court had never seen, played Elijah's voice recordings, and presented sworn statements from people who had originally been coerced. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as the truth poured out. Then came the most damning piece of evidence: a financial tracing report showing payments directly from the Landon family to Girardi and Judge Compton. Bank transfers, hidden accounts, deposits that lined up perfectly with dates from the first trial. Girardi's face turned gray. The Landon relatives began whisper fighting in the back row. Judge Compton stared at the table like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. This time, no amount of money could save them. The ruling came swiftly, almost poetic compared to the dragged-out corruption of years prior. The court declared all previous transfers null and void. Redwood Estate was restored to Chase as the rightful owner. The forgers, the bribers, and the corrupt officials were hit with criminal charges, fines, and impending prison sentences. But Chase didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Revenge, he believed, wasn't complete until the guilty understood exactly what they had taken. So when he returned to Redwood Estate for the first time in years, he didn't go alone. Reporters followed. Former employees who had been forced out under the Landon regime stood with him. Local activists who'd been fighting judicial corruption showed up in support. It felt less like a homecoming and more like justice reclaiming sacred ground. Chase stepped onto the porch of his grandfather's old house. The air felt different, cleaner, lighter, like the land itself had been waiting for him. He let the cameras roll as he made a statement. This land isn't just property, it's heritage, it's integrity, and integrity won today. The crowd applauded. But his real revenge came weeks later. Chase didn't sue the Landons for damages. He crushed them with something far worse. He bought out every failing business they owned. He purchased the mortgages on their houses. He reclaimed every bit of power they once tried to steal from him. The Landon relatives who once flaunted their wealth now lived under the shadow of the man they betrayed. They saw his name everywhere they looked, on documents, on properties, on deeds. They couldn't escape the fact that his success now towered above them like a monument to their downfall. As for Girardi, Chase blocked his attempts to negotiate or apologize. The disgraced lawyer eventually lost everything: the gold, the suits, the reputation he'd built on corruption. Judge Compton was convicted of judicial misconduct and bribery. His retirement shattered, his legacy destroyed. Chase didn't celebrate. He simply watched, silently, as justice spread like wildfire. One evening, months after regaining Redwood, Chase stood alone in the fields again. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold, just like when he was a boy. The wind rustled through the grass, familiar and soft. He whispered to the land, "It's yours again, Grandpa, and it always will be." He had his legacy back. His peace. And his revenge, delivered not with rage, but with power, patience, and truth. Redwood Estate stood, unbroken, a reminder that corruption can steal many things, but it can never steal what destiny has already written. And Chase Merrick finally let himself breathe. The war was over. He had won without mercy. And justice had taken root in the soil of Redwood once more.